Hello, and welcome to Odd Cognition. Today, we will be discussing the myth of climate change, but not the one you think. In the Western world, there continues to be a widely held, usually right-wing biased belief that climate change is a hoax, made up by the left to take away jobs and destroy the working class through government regulation. These claims are decidedly false, but likely not worth arguing about. We'll discuss divide and conquer mindsets in later videos. The myth we are here to discuss leads to a darker realm, one I wish we did not need to enter. The myth. Climate change is a personal responsibility of the people that can be reversed, albeit with great effort. The truth. Climate change is a set-in-stone reality that is already happening, and despite all personal efforts will continue to get significantly worse. Backstory. We as a global society have passed our 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature from pre-industrial societies, making this the warmest Earth has been in 11,000 years. The current undebated goal is to mitigate the damage done by 2100. At current rates, it is extremely likely that we will hit 1.5 degrees Celsius warming between 2025 and 2030. Technically, this projection can be pushed back, but for reasons we will discuss later, that is a technicality rather than a possibility. After that, projections get harder to lock down, but without massive changes, meaning creating a net zero carbon emission world, we will likely hit 2 degrees Celsius warming between 2036 and 2050. These figures are extremely important because somewhere between 1.5 and 2 degrees will hit our point of no return. Ice sheets will melt faster and faster, leading to higher ocean levels and less heat reflection. At that point, the world takes over, even if we stop all emissions, which is nigh on impossible. So what? Well, here are some of the expectations. At 1.5 degrees, sea ice will remain during most summers. 14% of the world population will be exposed to severe heat waves, like the one that blanketed southeastern Europe in 2007, at least once every 5 years. 350 million people will be exposed to severe droughts. Coral reefs will experience very frequent mass mortalities, and 31 to 69 million people will experience severe coastal flooding. At 2 degrees Celsius, ice-free summers are 10 times more likely. 37% of the world's populations will be exposed to severe heat waves. 411 million people will be exposed to severe droughts. Almost all coral reefs will die. Up to 80 million people will experience flooding. Global crop yields are expected to be 14% lower, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central and South America. By current projections, hundreds of millions of lives will be destroyed by climate change by the year 2050. There will be less livable land, less fresh water, less food, less biodiversity, and this is by significant margins. These are things we cannot get back. Death and mass migration are extremely likely. And these are our current projections. They assume that we will make serious attempts to lower carbon emissions and to stop climate change. So far, past projections have been notoriously optimistic. We ran through the 1 degree hurdle and barely blinked. The US has even reversed policy and restrictions under the Trump administration. The question, what the hell, why, comes up. The ones who stole the world. Just 100 companies have been the source of more than 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions since 1988. The top 20 have contributed to 480 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent since 1965. This small number of fossil fuel giants are almost entirely to blame, not simply because they pushed the products, but because they lied to the public and manipulated legislators since the 1950s. They have known for almost 70 years that their actions were destroying the planet, but made conscious decisions to manipulate data, bribe officials, and spread conspiracy theories about regulation through the public domain. For destroying the world, they made trillions of dollars profit. Profits that will be completely useless when the world implodes on itself. Yes, you heard correctly. A few thousand ultra-rich elites decided that profits trumped all else. They ignored climate change scientists for decades and still do. They continue to lobby with politicians, lining their pockets in order to ensure that they politely ignore public outcry. Blame China. Make a few small changes, but ultimately leave the travesty intact, and you have a ticket to re-election. Resistance is futile. I despise that this is the world we live in. It could have been so much more. And there were times when our demands carried weight, but that was well beyond my, and likely your, birth. It is not impossible that we make significant changes, but net zero emissions would require several important steps. First, the political climates of all developed nations must change so that the voice of the many overshadows the voice of the wealthy. In some nations, this would require rebellion, itself a lofty goal. We will discuss why protests help the state in future videos. Second, developed nations must be stopped cold. Their populations must stop growing and their infrastructure must not be allowed to develop as our own had. This is obviously unfair and puts these nations and their people at further disadvantage, but the damage of industry is too high. The requirement of 2.5 billion more people by 2050 would overburden the reducing crop yields. These nations, at the same time, will feel the heaviest burden of climate change, even though they contributed the least. Third, net zero technologies and restrictions must be implemented worldwide. Fourth, it must all be done peacefully, or relatively peacefully. A nuclear winter would offset climate change for sure, but not in a positive way. Fifth, this must all happen within 12 to 15 years. Past behavior is the greatest predictor of future behavior. While these goals are technically possible, through quantum mechanics, so is flipping a light bulb and having the room turn into solid gold. Don't stand there for a billion years to try it. Apocalypse now. We tend to romanticize the end of our current era, a zombie outbreak or a nuclear bomb, but most change doesn't happen in a singular big event, but with many smaller ones. Millions will migrate to more habitable regions, requiring food, shelter, and water that simply isn't available. Riots will become common, fascist governments will rise, wars will be fought over water supplies, fires, floods, famine, drought, hurricanes, and even earthquakes will increase in intensity and frequency. Some will turn to bunkers, others guns, and others still denial. But it won't happen in a month, or a year, or probably even a decade. It will be a long slog through increasingly worsening situations where only the very rich maintain a semblance of immunity. This is the real malignancy of destruction. By happening so slow, the narrative can be strung along until the very last moment. Everything will be fine in our own little bubbles, until the moment that it isn't. Thank you for watching. These videos take a lot of time and effort to make. Please like and subscribe so I can continue to grow and make quality content weekly. Be safe and be well.